Bienvenue à la dernière session, mais non la moindre, de notre sommet exécutif organisé par la Chambre de commerce du Canada. On a un invité de marque que vous connaissez sans doute, le ministre François-Philippe Champagne. On a bien hâte d'entendre ses propos sur toutes sortes de perspectives. Mais avant, I'd like to thank the previous participants on the panel. It was very interesting to see these issues about health technology and digital transformation, but coming at us from different vantage points. So universities and insurance and consumer health and pharmaceuticals. So I think this goes to the richness of the content that we're providing here at the CCC. So to introduce the minister, we have someone who's obviously very well known herself. So we have the pleasure to introduce a fellow board member, Martha Hall Finley. Martha comes to us from an extensive career in public affairs, public sector, and also from the private sector. She's a key contributor on our board around sustainability issues. And she has the pleasure today to introduce the Minister of Science, Innovation and Industry. Donc, Martha, je te cède la parole. Je vous souhaite une bonne délibération, ministre, et à Perrin.
Merci beaucoup, Mario. Good afternoon, everybody. Bonjour, tout le monde. Thank you very much for the invitation to be able to at least introduce these two extraordinary people. I mean, advance warning, I was given 4 minutes to introduce two, as I said, extraordinary people. That's 2 minutes each. So that none of what I say will do justice to what either of these two people have done in their lives so far, and certainly contribute now. I know the folks at Suncor will be upset if I don't say something. So, you know, as most of you know, at Suncor, we're part of a sector that is by far the biggest investor in clean tech in Canada. Very proud of that. But we're hugely involved in investing in all sorts of technologies, whether it's digital, operational, and most recently really excited about our participation with the Creative Destruction Lab out of the University of Toronto and the Rapid Testing Consortium. I think an example, a fantastic example, which I hope we build on, just a little plug, Minister, the opportunity for collaboration among businesses, among sectors, with governments is just extraordinary when we put our minds to it. And so I'm hoping that not only the results of that work, but also the results of the concept of that level of collaboration. And of course, you know, I plug for our engagement in the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance and the Clean Resources Industry Network, CRIN, which again, Minister, there's a big thank you, because the federal government has recently announced significant support for that work. I mean, all of this work, all of this collaboration and investment in finding the solutions to reduce our collective environmental footprint, extraordinary. So thank you for that. So now I've even used up that much time for this introduction. First, Perrin Beatty. Perrin, I cannot fit everything about you in a small period of time, but you know, Perrin, people have said, oh, he's a huge asset to the Chamber of Commerce. I would say Perrin Beatty is a huge asset to this country and has been for a very long time. And he's, you know, long history in business, government, academia, media, minister of everything from national revenue, defense, health, communications, with Solicitor General, and then of course an illustrious time at CBC, variety of things. But if I may, I think one of the most important things, Perrin, that you have contributed and you continue to contribute is your ability to work with others to show how politics gets done, how politics should be done, how post-politics you can still be engaged in policy in a way that gets things done. Just really rather incredible, and I'm so proud to have been able to call you and still be able to call you a friend and a colleague. So just a personal thank you for everything you do for this country. Monsieur le Ministre, before we came on, the viewers should know there was a little bit of a crack about age. And I said, be careful, because there are those on the call quite a bit older than he is. And I think the point is really to be made that here's a man who's accomplished a great deal already, certainly in business, in law, international trade, It really a rather incredible resume. One of the World Economic Forum Young Leaders and Global Leaders. Already in politics, I think he's rivaling you, Perrin, in terms of Minister of Everything. Having been Minister of, let's see, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance, Minister of International, then Minister of International Trade, then Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and of course now Minister of Innovation and pretty much everything to do with economic activity in the country. I know that's not the official title, but let's acknowledge that you have a lot on your shoulders. But also just not only what you have done so far and what you're doing, but it bodes well for, what, again, not too much pressure, but expectations, high expectations in terms of what you're going to continue to be able to do for us and the country as a whole. I'm absolutely confident that the people listening will get a taste of all of that in the session coming up. So I will turn it over to you, Mr. Minister, and to you, Perrin. But I think Minister Champagne, you're going to give us a keynote first. Over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous. And Martha, let me put a plug. I'm talking to you from Shawinigan today. So, very happy to join you. Thank you so much for your kind word, Martha, because you and I had some kind of the same responsibilities in government. And I'm very, very honored. Actually, the viewers would know we had already had a very engaging discussion even before we started to broadcast. It's a good way, it's a good segue into what we're going to do, and hopefully we can engage. But thank you for your generosity and your kind words to me and Perrin, because in yourself, thought leadership, when I was listening to you and looking at you, I thought, we're so lucky in Canada to have thought leaders like you who have accomplished so much and still are contributing today to the public discourse. And I want to thank the Chamber for inviting me today. I'm delighted. This is actually my second or first, depending how you put it, or certainly the first in English in my new role. And Perrin, what a pleasure to be working with you. As Martha was saying, you're not only a huge asset for the Chamber. She almost stole my line. I was about to say, he's a huge asset for the country, but she said it. So let me repeat it. You are a huge asset to the country. And we are delighted that we can work with you in so many ways. And I think I can disclose in front of everyone that I call you my friend as well. And so I'm delighted, and there's a lot of good things coming out, certainly of our discussion. And I'm really very pleased that you have asked me to come here to share a bit of the priorities in my new role. And Martha was kind enough to say, yes, I've been around. I've done different things, but the priorities when it comes to innovation, science, and industry at a time which is much needed in our country. We're at a crossroad. And this is a momentous time to be with you today. But before I start, let me just say that I'd like to say a few words about my dear friend and predecessor, Minister Navneet Bains. I think we would all agree, Perrin and the people who are with us today, that he really put solid foundations for this country to be able to build the next steps of our economic recovery, and I would say our economic prosperity. So I really want to acknowledge his work and his dedication to our country, because he's been really tremendous in doing that. So it's a pleasure for me to continue. And like I said, accelerate, expand the good work that has been started. But as you would probably, some of you would look at me and say, I might be new to this portfolio, but I think I can humbly say that I've been around the block quite a bit since the last 6 years, when I joined government, or when I joined Parliament, I should say, and then was appointed to serve as ministers. And I would say, Perrin, many of your members still have my phone number, because I can tell you my phone is ringing constantly. If I did text diplomacy, I certainly do business by text these days, because many of your members have reached out, and I love it, because that's how we can get things done fast. And that's what we need in this time. But I had the opportunity to get to know and work with many of you. And I think Martha was saying it first when I was Minister of International Trade. And some of you will remember at the time the discussion around the CPTPP. And when I look back, I am so proud that we have joined And we were active at the table to make this a reality, giving a place for Canada in Asia, a very good place. And I'll come back to that at a later stage. But I think this was a great accomplishment. And I'm sure with the passage of time, we would all look back and say this was a very strategic decision. When I was Minister of Infrastructure, I still remember the Gordie Howe Bridge, the biggest crossing between Canada and the United States being built. And more recently as Minister of Foreign Affairs. And many times, Perrin, I have to disclose that I felt that I was part of the sales force of your member. And I'm very proud of it, so keep asking me to be with you on the road, one way or the other. I will continue to be your champion and certainly make sure that your voice, your products, your services are well known around the world. But as I think Martha alluded, before I came to government, I mean, some of you may know I spent 20 years in business, 20 years that I spent in Europe, 5 years in Italy, then I went to Switzerland, and then finally in the United Kingdom. But probably one thing you don't know is that the taste of business really started at home with my dad, who was an entrepreneur. So although I've been in large multinational, I started in the business of one. And probably I was the second employee in that business. And certainly, I would say I really appreciated my international experience, but it's really at home that I learned the ropes. And for that, I'm very thankful and grateful to my dad, which is serving me well today. So for me, being Minister of Innovation, Science, and Industry, it's a bit like an homecoming. It's kind of joining back the family where everything started for me in life. And as you will see in my approach, which is probably very familiar to many of you in the business sector, it's to take strategic, immediate actions with a long-term vision. And certainly that's really what is motivating me every day. And if past experiences of any guidance in what we're going through now, our economic recovery will only be successful if the public and the private sector work hand in hand. And we've seen it time and time again, and that's why I'm so pleased to be with you today. So if we step back a bit and we look at the current geopolitical and economic context around the world today, what we see is that we're facing enormous challenges, which are requiring quick, ambitious, and concerted actions. This is the time for battlefield decisions, where you may not have all the information and the surroundings are moving, but you have to make a decision. And that's really the sense that we have to feel today in light of everything that's happening. Indeed, I would put to you, colleagues, that the world is facing currently two existential threats. First, COVID-19. And I'm happy to see that more and more people are getting vaccinated in our country and the impact that it had on our economy. But I would say the even bigger threat, which is posed to humanity today, is climate change. This is where innovation, science, and technology will help us find the breakthrough solutions to address these big challenges of humanity. And that's why I feel that we're somehow at the crossroad of the solutions that will make us thrive and succeed in this new world. But let me start for a moment with the pandemic. A year ago, our country, the world, was hit by the most severe public health crisis in more than a century. It was felt everywhere, from Bombay to Toronto to Vancouver to Shawinigan. Everyone felt it. The economy came to a halt. I would say the world went on pause. And I can tell you, because as a former Foreign Affairs Minister, we had to repatriate hundreds of thousands of Canadians who were stranded around the world. Actually, the largest repatriation effort in our nation history in peacetime. We were facing border closure, airport closure, aerospace closures. This was a challenge of unprecedented proportion. But at the very same time, businesses were forced to close across the country, and tens of thousands of Canadians were losing their jobs. And we all know that women, Indigenous Canadians, and people of color were disproportionately affected by this pandemic. In the face of this crisis, our government took immediate and unprecedented action to help Canadians. We did so by rolling out a suite of emergency economic support programs that many would be familiar to your members, whether it's the Canada Emergency Business Account, whether it's the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy to deal with the fixed costs, whether it's the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, where we were maintaining people in employment, probably one of the most significant measures we have put in order to ensure the recovery. And also the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund, because rural Canada needed that. I can tell you in regions where I'm come from, this was instrumental to make sure that we could continue some business activity during these tough times. These programs have literally helped to keep the lights on and to protect Canadian jobs at large, as well as small businesses all across the country. And we all know that small and medium-sized businesses are the backbone of our economy. So that was essential to protect them and make sure that once the pandemic is over, we could recover together. And thanks to these support programs, Canada has recovered jobs faster, 40% faster than we have seen south of our border. But let's be clear, we're not out of the woods yet, but we are turning a corner. And we see it. Yesterday, I was at a facility where people were getting vaccinated. So vaccination is certainly happening. And what we've said to Canadians since the very beginning, Perrin, was a very, very simple message. We will always have your back for as long as it takes. That was our central message. And I believe it was felt across our nation. It gave people confidence that we would get through this together. And as you know, sentiment of confidence is essential when you go into a crisis like that. While the pandemic has brought about serious and difficult challenges, and we mentioned a number of them, it also opened up opportunity for Canada to seize as we're looking forward. There are big questions coming up, like how do we build the economy that is stronger, better, greener, more resilient, and inclusive? How do we make sure that we invest strategically and that we fully leverage our strengths in science and innovation to become more competitive and create the jobs of today and tomorrow, but also the economy of the future? So let me spend a minute on Canada's strength. The good news is, I think you believe, that Canada is perfectly positioned to turn those many challenges posed by COVID-19 and climate change into winning opportunities for Canadian workers, businesses, and I would say society as a whole in our country. To start, Canada has the essential pillars to attract investments. The three essential pillars: stability, predictability, and a deep belief in the rule of law. But what's more, since 2015, our government has invested strategically so as to give ourselves what I often refer to as the means of our dreams. First, Canada today has world-class scientific expertise in areas like artificial intelligence, genomics, and quantum computing. If you look at quantum computing, just I think a week ago, I was making an announcement at D-Wave, which is making quantum computing available to small and medium-sized businesses through the cloud to Canadian businesses. And if you think back, this is the first time in North America where small and medium-sized business can now access, quantum computing. And I would think this is really terrific. The other thing I will share with you is that in my very first discussion with the Secretary of Commerce of the United States, which I had very recently, one of the things she mentioned in our very, very first call was artificial intelligence, and noting how Canada was really leading the way when it comes to artificial intelligence. So I would say our strengths are making a difference. The second thing is our targeted industrial support has strengthened our innovation capacity in cutting-edge fields like advanced manufacturing and digital technologies. Third, to the supercluster initiatives, which will be well known to many of you, we can now systematically match scientific expertise with industrial know-how, helping us to commercialize our most promising innovations. And commercialization here is the key word. I know we need to do more together to increase the means of commercializing our best ideas. And fourth, and you would expect that from a former trade minister, is our trade deals with the United States, Mexico, with Europe and Asia, which now give us preferential market access to 1.3 billion consumers around the world in some of the largest markets, like in Europe, for example. Not to mention, and you would have heard that before, that Canada is the only G7 country which has a free trade agreement with all other G7 countries. And if I go back to the famous CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, just remember that after Japan, Canada is the second largest economy in that bloc. And I would say it's pretty remarkable because it's not every day that Canada is second in Asia when it comes to numbers, but we are the second largest economy and we should take full benefit of that. But above all, ladies and gentlemen, above all, we have tremendous human capital. Canada is one of the most highly educated countries in the world. We are home to world-class universities, and our outstanding research talent and infrastructure are recognized internationally. We all know something, that talent attracts investments. And with our upscaling and our reskilling agenda, we will be successful. Which brings me to talk to you about our priorities. What we need to do now together is to leverage the strengths that are science, technology, and innovation, and transform them into opportunities that will not only enhance the health and safety of Canadians, but also the bottom line for businesses across our country. And I plan to do that by focusing on two priorities at this time. The first one is biomanufacturing, and I'm sure you would understand why, and the green economy. So let me step back again and speak for a moment about biomanufacturing. On the biomanufacturing front, we are in the process of reversing 4 decades of decline in domestic capacity. Last March, just a few days after the World Health Organization, I think it was March 2020, declared that there was a world pandemic. 12 days after, we had already put $200 million to support vaccine and therapeutics and biomanufacturing in Canada. And within 30 days, we had added another 600 million, making it close to $1 billion of investments within days of the pandemic. And you have seen this was really just the beginning. You may have seen that I just announced recently 3 new biomanufacturing investments to advance the Made in Canada vaccine and therapeutic projects to try to help everyone to raise their hand and try to help our country get through this. And obviously, you can expect more of these investments in the coming weeks and months, because one thing we have learned is that we need more domestic capacity. We need to be more resilient to face whatever may come next. But we are also making these investments to improve our global competitiveness in this very key sector of our economy. Over time, I believe Canada could become a biomanufacturing export platform. And that's certainly what I'm saying to the CEOs that I'm talking to around the world. In short, here is an opportunity not only to ensure our resiliency, but there's a driver for economic growth, increased competitiveness, and job creation. And we have also been there to seize the investments opportunities that we've seen, whether we're talking about Novavax in Montreal. And I remember talking to the CEO of Novavax who told me, you know what, Minister, I chose Canada because I could go in 7 or 8 countries. We're very active there. But you know what? Canada is a safe bet. We want to be in Canada. Whether it's about precision nanosystems in Vancouver, one of the jewels of what we have invented here in Canada, or if you think about Quebec City's Medicago, which is also doing very, very promising work. I would say to you, colleagues, our strategy is working and it's yielding results. In fact, just last week, you may have seen that Medicago announced that it's starting its phase 3 clinical trials. And that's good news for Canadians, because that could become a homegrown proper vaccine for COVID-19 or whatever may come next. There's still a lot of work to do. There's no doubt about that. But we are rebuilding the ecosystem from one investment to the other. And with your help, I'm sure we can rebuild that to make sure that we onshore as much of the critical components that we may need in Canada to ensure a resiliency for this generation and future generation. But while, Perrin, we're working to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic, we still face climate change. Greening our economy is a top priority for government, but I would say it's also a top priority for Canadians. That's why we've made climate action a central part of our economic recovery plan. We are living in an era where more and more consumers, and rightly so, are seeking more environmentally friendly products. Well, it's no surprise then that businesses, either small, medium, or large, are shifting their production and greening their production. We have a real opportunity to be at the forefront of this transformation and making Canada a real leader in this era. This is not only about a clean future. It's about economic growth. It's about competitiveness. It's about the jobs of today and tomorrow. This is really about our collective future. It's not only the right thing to do, but I think we can all agree it's the smart thing to do. From the auto industry to aerospace innovation, from the digital economy to the manufacturing sector, to natural resources and energy, the transition to a greener, cleaner economy will cut across all sectors. And I think we heard that from Marta as well before. We are, dear friends, at a crossroads where the investments we make today will define the growth sectors of tomorrow, offering countless opportunities to small and medium-sized businesses across our nation. So let me sum up. The world is in the midst of an economic reordering, I would say, which is probably comparable to the Industrial Revolution. At a time where the G7 share of the world GDP is back to where it was in 1917. And just as in the 1940s, one of my predecessors, CDR, worked closely with the private sector to turn Canada from an agricultural producer into a competitive industrial exporter. Today, we have an opportunity to turn Canada's industry and service-based economy into a digital, technological, and innovation powerhouse. In closing, let me leave you with a quote from someone that I highly regard, Pennywise, which is the president of 3M Canada, who recently said, what we really need to think about is how to position ourselves for the future and not let the future come to us. That's exactly what we're doing and that we will continue to do. So in conclusion, I would say, let's seize the moment. Let's be ambitious. And let's make sure that we are part of the change that businesses and Canadians want, and that we can build together a more resilient and prosperous future for all. With that, Perrin, I'll be happy to take questions from you, the audience, and engage in a very lively discussion with all of you. Merci tout le monde.
Minister, thank you so much. You've really set the table very well for our discussion, including, I might add, by quoting a distinguished board member of the Canadian Chamber, Penny Wise, who is, we think as highly of her as you do. She's outstanding. I want to start by discussing the impact that the pandemic has had on Canada and your perception of it. One of the things I've done over the course of the last year is to talk to a wide range of CEOs. Not one of them tells me that their business is going to look the same again. Everybody sees profound changes. I'd be really interested in getting your perspective as minister on what are some of the macro changes that we're seeing that we have to come to grapple with. You mentioned, and I'll come back to some of these a little bit later, you mentioned some of the strategic decisions you're making on bioscience, for example. But what are some of the underlying trends that you're seeing that are going to affect Canada for the better or for the worse that we need to keep in mind?
Well, thank you, Perrin. And the very first thing, and I saw that when I was Foreign Affairs Minister, you may know, or we'll put that in a book one day, but I'll give you part of a chapter, is that when the pandemic started, I created a group which I call kind of a G15 in a way. You know, a number of countries came together. We had about 12 calls, or I can't remember exactly, every week. Very informal, an hour. That was the rule. No notes, no official. We were just chatting about what was going on in the world. And that's where we talk about air bridges. You may remember I was worried at the time, a bit during like the war, would there be connectivity between Canada and Europe, for example? That's where we talk about, for example, transit hubs, what we need to do to keep our people coming, and supply chain. And one of the key words that was coming, I think, is that supply chain are going from global to regional, and we're putting more emphasis on resiliency than efficiency. And that was clearly something that I've heard that everyone felt that, you know, what was happening to us. And we have to put back to where we were a year ago. We did not know exactly. At that time, we did not know whether we would find a vaccine and when, and whether it'd be successful to stop the pandemic. But one thing was clear is that there was a need to rethink how we were organizing ourselves, how we would work with countries which share the values and principles that are dear to Canada, whether it's the Five Eyes, whether it's the G7, whether it's the European Union. You've seen time and time again at the time where I tried to align ourselves, whether it's about standards, whether it's about critical minerals, whether it's about sharing intelligence and information to make sure that we protect our national interests in a broad sense, to make sure that we would be resilient, because we've seen state and non-state actors during this pandemic doing things that were of concerns to all of us as things were evolving. And I think this will change my perception, how companies are reorganizing. And I see it, I think, and I know it sounds very basic, but stability, predictability, and the rule of law, if you look around the world, I would say that they are in short supply, where you find these three basic principles. And I would say security of supply came because Canada did not put export restrictions. And during the pandemic, believe it or not, I had countries calling me and say, Minister, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but can we rely on you for food security? I mean, we were at some stage there. So I think if you look at our key sector, whether it's quantum computing, and like I said, how I'm proud about D-Wave and the fact that Canada, I could brag to my US colleague that the first and only supercomputer available to SMEs is in Canada. And whether we talk about AI, which is going to transform everything, genomics, plant protein, how can Canada could build this sector? And the good work that has been done by the Industry Council and Monique Leroux and part of your members and a lot of people have contributed. Those thoughts have made it into our actions. And I think that what I'm seeing today, Perrin, I'm sure if you were to talk about those who were involved at the time, you would hear similar things, that we need to rethink our industrial policy, digital economy, the data economy. How do we invest in talent? Because today capital is plenty, but it's not necessarily a big differentiator. But what people ask me most when I try to attract them in Canada is that, do you have the talent? We can build the brick and mortar. Will we have the people? And talent attract investment, and that, I think we shine.
Can we drill down on some of this? When you and I worked together, when you were International Trade Minister, what you were looking at is how do we take down barriers? How do we build global supply chains? How do we reduce cost to Canadian business or to Canadian consumers? And a compelling argument was made that we shouldn't try to do everything at home. We should try to build these supply chains that stretch across the world, and that each country should be supplying what it can most efficiently supply. We discovered this time last year that we couldn't get our hands on PPEs, on personal protective equipment. We didn't have the capacity at home, and there was difficulty getting them internationally. And we saw a year ago that over 75 countries around the world brought in pandemic protectionism, where they put on controls on exports. So the natural instinct is to say, we need to bring all of this stuff to onshore it to Canada. Yet if you're an economist looking at it, you would say that much of this is very low value. And this is precisely the sort of thing that we should be using international supply chains to do. What's the balance that you strike between the two? When you look at it from the point of view of what constitutes the security of Canada, what do we have to do at home? And what does it make sense for us to continue to supply ourselves with from abroad?
Well, Perrin, you should be on my calls. We think alike, because I did share your thoughts, and which is, with allies, and said, listen, we probably cannot replicate everything. When I think onshoring, I'm talking about adjuvants, lipids, fill and finish, gloves, syringes. Although I would think that Canadians are probably going to err on the side of caution, I would say. Might not be as efficient, and if you source it around the world. But one thing I can see is that as we're going through pandemic, and this was a white swan, because, people could expect that to come. No one knew which form it would take and how quickly it would come. But certainly, I think now there's a premium on resiliency. I mean, I feel it, and I think CEOs understand that. And in that sense, Canada, traceability, quality of supply, security of supply, we shine. Like I said, when people said you're a safe bet, I like that expression, because I think it embodies. They said, we have operation around the world, but you know what? We really like our Canadian operation these days. And because we've been there. But what I think we need to do, and you raise a very good point. I'm sure economists would challenge, do we need that? But what we may want to do is, if I look, for example, on resiliency on rare earth metals, working, you saw, with our US friends, and I was talking to my UK counterpart just yesterday. Could we not, with a group of countries which share the same values and principles, work together to ensure kind of a mutual assistance, whatever may come? And therefore, we may not be able to do everything in Canada, although I think with our natural resources and the talent we have, and the countries which is bordered 3 ocean and having trade agreements with everyone, we're very attractive, I think. But certainly when I talk to colleagues, it's really to say what makes sense. We may not need to replicate everything everywhere, but we do need to build redundancy. And I think redundancy is not a bad thing. Might be slightly less efficient, but whatever comes next, I think Canadians will expect from us that we have made the strategic investments. Look at the Medicago, attracting a Novavax in Canada, making sure that we ramp up our fill and finish capacity like we've done, to say maybe next time we'll do a tech transfer. But also I would say, Perrin, and I'll stop there, is that what companies are looking, they say, listen, today, if you look at mRNA could be also potentially the solution for some treatment for cancer. So people are not only looking at what it can do today, but if you couple that with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, where could that bring us? And that is very attractive. That's why we need to build the ecosystem. And oftentimes I say, government only creates the conditions for investment to flourish, for talents to come, for us to attract investment. I think it's your members who are going to make it happen. I'll certainly work to build the infrastructure needed, both digital and physical, but it's your members who can seize the moment and really be ambitious, because I think the world is looking at Canada very favorably at a time where people are a little worried about the supply chain and what it may mean in the future for other critical components. Today, it's a health crisis. What's going to be next? No one wants to speculate, but certainly people would want to be more resilient.
Can we focus more narrowly even on the pharmaceutical sector? You mentioned that you're hoping to reverse 4 decades of decline in terms of the pharmaceutical sector in Canada. Should Canada have been able to supply COVID-19 vaccines from domestic sources?
Well, I wish, but you take the cards that are on the deck. I wish, and I think Canadians wish, but when I look back, I mean, no real country was prepared for the scope and magnitude of what came. Not one country in the world. But one thing that I think we need to do as a country is to learn from that and say, okay, how can, despite the investments we've made, and we reopened to some of our program to the biopharmaceutical question. So when I've been talking to CEOs, I said, listen, I do know that there's some long-term policy issue we'd like to discuss, but we're in the middle of a health emergency. So help me build the ecosystem one investment at a time. And with these investments, we're going to, rebuild slowly but surely the ecosystem. And yes, we can discuss about the policy issues that have perhaps created that vacuum and perhaps the scope that we had in terms of our biomanufacturing capabilities. But certainly, I think also, Perrin, I think it's a great opportunities because these companies, we know they invest in R&D, they create good jobs, they bring an ecosystem, and this is a matter of public policy because on one end, obviously we want these companies to be here. On the other end, we also want, prescription drugs to be affordable for Canadians. So there's different public policy that we need to discuss as a nation. But in the short term, that's why I say I take immediate strategic action with a long-term vision. But I would say the long term is no excuse for inaction. So that's why I think what you saw in investments, the money we've put beyond that, I can think of Vino in Saskatchewan, I can think of Accelera, I can think of Providence in Alberta. I mean, all these companies have raised their hand and said, we think we can help. And then we said, sure, let's work together and we'll see, because as you know, when you start with a vaccine candidate to the final phase, it's quite a long journey. But what we're trying to do is to support people alongside the journey.
One of the criticisms in the past that the pharmaceutical sector has had was that when they called Ottawa, there was no one at the other end of the line. You're certainly signaling that it's very different right now, and that you're anxious to have that dialogue. But looking at the strategy, is it realistic? Is it desirable? Is it realistic for Canada to look at self-sufficiency? Or are we talking about co-sufficiency with other countries? How would you see this developing for the future?
Well, I think if you were to ask the CEOs, they would say they probably all have my phone number by now, of pharmaceutical, because I receive a lot of text messages. And that's how it should be. It's true for pharmaceutical, it's true for the energy sector, it's true for people in the aerospace sector, the automotive sector. I think engagement. I said it at the get-go, nothing that we can do, and I think this crisis have shown public and private partnership around testing, around, when we made this call to action and 6,500 companies in Canada retool, changed their production line to say, yes, we can help. We can produce sanitizer. We can produce personal protective equipment. When it comes to the pharmaceutical sector, listen, Perrin, we'll try. I mean, I've been talking to a number of CEOs. They see Canada as attractive. There are some long-term discussions we need to have, but I would say in the short term, take Novavax. Again, I would say when I spoke to the CEO, those are companies that can go anywhere in the world. I mean, every country would say, listen, you come and we'll contribute to CapEx, we'll do whatever you want. But the discussion was often about what Canada embodies. And when you say, I chose Canada, that is powerful. Companies who produce in 6, 7 countries, I can remember, and no short of capital. Trust me, these days, all these companies have financial means that we have not seen in a long time. So the way you attract these companies today are different. It's not just about CapEx. And that's why I was saying to you and to all your members is together, I cannot do that alone. Together, we need to rebuild the ecosystem, because the first question they asked me, Perrin, was that if I go to Canada, will I have the people to run and develop the next product? Today it's COVID-19. Perhaps we need to look at what's beyond that. And I think that's where the ecosystem with universities, polytechnics, the small and medium-sized businesses, those who do fill and finish, that's where I think we can make a difference. And oftentimes I said, come here in Canada, because you can satisfy our domestic market fairly easily. We're a G7 country with a relatively small population. But then we can help you contribute to solve this challenge. Today it's COVID-19, but I think I'm sure people are nodding at home. What's next? No one has a crystal ball, but I think having more biopharmaceutical capabilities in Canada, perhaps not all of it, but some of it, I think is a prudent approach after what we went through and the impact we have seen on our economy and on people generally, and families and the people who have died across our country.
Can we talk about the digitalization of Canada? And you've certainly mentioned some of the areas in which Canada is a leader, AI being a case in point. We've seen in Canada since the pandemic that we've leapt ahead almost a decade in terms of the adoption of digital technologies. And we've seen how important having a robust telecommunications system is to the functioning of our economy and the functioning of our society. What are the lessons that you as minister draw from the experience of the last 12 months when it comes to the digitalization of the country, both in terms of of what's essential for us at this point, what sort of competitive advantage we have, what were we doing wrong that we can do better now? How have the views of the government changed?
Well, thank you, Perrin. I think the first thing we need to connect people to high-speed internet. I think let's start with the basic, I mean, we still have a number of Canadians who have not. I made an announcement with the Prime Minister of Canada and the Premier of Quebec just recently to give an example where we say we'll connect 150,000 Quebecers within 2022. We took the objective with Minister Monsef to connect 98% of Canadians by 2026. That for me is like, if you look at the Maslow chart, this is like pillar number one. We need to be connected. This will allow families and kids, and even in where I'm calling you from, or at least where I'm participating from, a lot of the people I represent don't have that luxury to say, well, Mom, we'll do the homework from home today. They have to go to the local municipal library to connect. We need also that for people who are deciding, maybe because we're going to live perhaps in an hybrid form after COVID of working from home and perhaps in an office. We've seen people going in rural parts of Canada. We've seen real estate booming in some other parts, not just in city center. And we've seen also small and medium-sized businesses, even our farmers who want to connect with either their clients or their suppliers to be able to. So that's step number one. And I've often said it as infrastructure minister, when you go in urban center, they talk to you about mobility. And when you go in rural Canada, people talk about connectivity. So at least we have a plan for connectivity. I would say we have a plan for mobility as well, because we've done significant investment. But if we stick with that, I think connecting Canadians to high-speed internet is step number one. Now, after that, we need to look at the data economy. And we see the digitalization of companies, and we need to help them. And I think the Canadian Chamber of Commerce could be a partner in that, because we're going from analog to digital. And this is going to be happening whether you have a small company or I would say a medium-sized company. I would say the big ones probably are there or are getting there. And the other thing we should work together is the value of data. There might be a day where you will have a line on your balance sheet for the value of your data. I'm just thinking, if you look forward, data is going to be key in terms of valuation of a company. So how do you protect that data? And now the digital charter that we've put forward is crucial. I know the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, like many of your members, have helped us to move along C11, which is really this piece of legislation which will allow us to have the digital charter, to put us not number two, but number one in the G7, to have the best framework in order to do two things: to allow innovation, but protect privacy. And this is fundamental in a society like ours. And I think voices like yours, Perrin, and your members, to say that for me should not even be political. This is about Canada. This is about our collective future. This is about intergenerational equity. Let's leave to our kids a digital charter so that they can make sure that they will have the tools and the legal framework to be best in class, where we would have, real enforcement mechanisms for those who may not want to protect the data like Canadians would expect today, but at the same time allowing for innovation. I think if we can do that together, and I've talked to my colleagues of all stripes to say, listen, let's get going and let's make sure that that piece of legislation can do that. That's going to be key for the data economy and helping future generations to really prosper.
You mentioned a little bit earlier the importance of human capital, that the richness of talent that we have in Canada is a source of great competitive strength for us. Once again, going back to the pandemic, how do you see the nature of work in Canada as having changed, and what should government be doing at this point to respond to it? We've seen some categories of work which are being destroyed at the present time. We've seen demand in other areas increasing dramatically. In some communities, we're seeing both rising unemployment and employers having a hard time getting the skills that they need. How do you see the changes in work, and what role does the government have to play in terms of ensuring that we have the talent that we need to compete in the 21st century?
Well, I think you said the key word there, parent skills. I think it's all about skills, whether it's about upskilling or reskilling. I mean, those have been the buzzword that people have been using to say either you help people to get the new skills, and I like to go in factories. I'm a floor guy, I like to go see and touch, and and perhaps sometimes too much. I remember being in factory, they say, Minister, it's great to have you, but our production numbers are going down and the light starts to be beeping. So they said, as much as we like you, we hope you're going to leave not too long because our production numbers are going down. But I would say that when you go on the factory floor, whether it's the automotive sector, the aerospace, or even in some advanced manufacturing, basic manufacturing, what you see today is far more digital equipment, where the type of skills that in a town like where I come from, where at the time you could work at the paper mill and you probably could go by with a set of skills which was probably you did not need to keep up to date so much. There was things were moving slowly. But one thing we've seen, and I think we can all agree on this call, is that things are evolving at a speed that like we've never seen before. And I think this pandemic, with obviously this hybrid model where we can do an event like that, where I love it because it's far more inclusive. People can be in their living room. We're reducing greenhouse gas emission, more inclusive, people more participating. But I think the key word is skills, and that again is with your members. That's why our skills program, for me, is one of the most essential thing we can do to succeed. Because again, talent attract investments. Today, you cannot go to an investors, and trust me, I try that every day. It's not enough to say we'll be there to support CapEx, so we can do this or that. What they want to know is that, are we going to get the right type of people with the right type of skills? And that I think we are blessed, certainly, in that sense that we have very talented people. We're blessed by geography. We have attracted many talents, and that's what we need to keep on doing together. But that is really in partnership, because there's a big place for the private sector in that.
In your opening remarks, you referred to a common friend of ours, Monique Leroux, who's a great Canadian and who was the chair of the Industry Strategy Council. They produced a report that the government released just before Christmas. Can you tell us who has responsibility for championing that report within government, what its status is, and what we see as a timetable in terms of implementation of some of the recommendations?
Well, I'm happy to be the champion. And I said that Monique and I know each other for some time. She's been, she's a regular in my text message as well. When over time, because I've been with you despite the fact that I might not have been industry minister, but when it was about trade or international, how can we have business in Canada? And I have looked at the report. Actually, I met the council as a group, I think a couple of days ago, and many of their policies have already been incorporated within our work, whether if you look at the aerospace, whether it's advanced manufacturing, whether it's about skills. How can we go about that? And what I'd like to do with them and with you, because I know the Chamber of Commerce is doing complementary work to what has been done. And what I'd like to offer to you, your board, and all the members, that to be kind of a sounding board. I think as we go forward, I think we have the foundation rights, but how we need to be agile and nimble. This is fast moving, and the questions that you're asking, the questions that your members are asking, the questions I'm asking myself are probably the questions that a lot of the countries are asking today. And to say, okay, if we take, before the world go back in fast forward, now I think we're back to pause and play. We're probably in between that. But before we go back to fast forward, how do we put the foundation, and what are the differentiators? And I think the Strategy Council has been exemplary in their work, in their wisdom, and in their thoughts. And I'm task oriented. So I've said, let's take some of them, let's try to implement them, and let's continue to work together, because I don't believe that you can take a snapshot of our industrial policy and say, here it is. It's an evolving, iterative process, because other countries will move their chess as well. We just need to be smarter and prepared. And I think we can do that together. And for example, I see the Strategic Innovation Fund, where we've put $3 billion, for example, to accelerate the 50-30 challenge, where we say we need more diversity at the ed table, 50% women, 30% minority or racialized Canadians. Those are the type of things we're taking left and right from you, from the Industry Council, and from others who have contributed. But with all of that, I think we can build a better industrial policy together.
And certainly we would be delighted to collaborate with you on that. The Industry Strategy Council has done some fine work, and they've both taken a strategic vision and put it out there, and some very practical recommendations in terms of what can be done. And we'd be delighted to work with you on any of that. Minister, so far I've been questioning you about your priorities and about what government can do. Let me turn it the other way. You're talking to members of the business community. What is it that you look to business to do to, first of all, help with during the management of the pandemic, but also look at the recovery and beyond? What's your vision of the role for business and how business can step up to the plate to be helpful?
Well, I often like to say to CEOs, parent, think big and think fast, and call me by all means, because that's I think how we can do. If you look at some of the things we have put in place, whether it's the Strategic Innovation Fund, whether it's refinancing our STDC for new technologies in Canada, where we put another $1 billion. I would say that the funds are largely there in order to be able to support and expand and accelerate. Now, what I would say to your members who are there is that let's make full use of the opportunities we have in front of us. I say, for example, in clean technologies, Canada can be a solution to a lot of the world's issues. Let's take the full benefit of this renewed partnership we have now with the United States. And, when I spoke to my colleague there, we said, let's speak again regularly. And I think we'll be announced that we'll speak even more often than that to try to align ourselves. We said we need to be resilient. What can Canadian companies contribute, for example, to this North American vision that we're trying to build? And I would say to company, be ambitious. Every time we've been investing, we've been looking for partners. The government is there to create the right conditions, to make sure that we can support you when needed, to make sure that we have the right policy. For example, when you said about the digital work, that we have the right policy when it comes to commercialization, that we have the right policy to make sure that startups can find capital here in Canada, the right policy when it comes to procurement, that we could be an early adopter, the right policy when it comes to our spend, when we say we're going to spend in infrastructure, how can we make that greener? I raised the issue, for example, of green cement or zero carbon cure in Nova Scotia. That could be transformational. So I'm talking to different, organizations within the Chamber of Commerce and say, how can I help you succeed? I am there to serve you. That's my mission every day when I wake up is, how can I help you succeed? To create jobs, to create a more resilient future, to create a better future. And if it's policy, we'll fix it. If it's capital, we'll try to get it. If it's markets, we'll try to create them for you. So that's really the sense that I said, there's nothing I can do without you. And nothing is possible without your organization, your members, because you're the ones who are going to seize the opportunity. We just need to put the things in place. And I'm sure when we can improve, you'll let me know like you've done. And that's the great thing. I can rely on you. I can trust you and work together to improve the ecosystem that we're trying to build together.
Minister, when Martha was introducing us earlier, she mentioned the fact that you've been given an enormous range of responsibilities within government. You've been essentially the government's answer to the Swiss Army knife, that you have so many different uses and different applications. Can I ask you, with regard to this department, if you were to look at what your legacy would be when you leave the department, how would you like to be remembered as minister?
Oh, that's a very good question, Perrin. You've been minister for a long time. I should have talked to you before. Listen, I'd like to be the one who has taken immediate action that would have a long-term impact. And I'll give you an example. When, for example, we were talking about the automotive sector, and say it's not just about a new mandate, it's about a transformational change. What I've said to my colleague is that don't look for me for incremental investments. Look for me for transformational investments. So what can we do to ensure that we create the jobs of today, but those that will be there in 20 years from now. So when I've been talking, whether it's in the auto sector, whether I'm looking at natural resources, whether when I spoke with Premier Kenney, whether when we invested recently in green mobility, take Lion Electric. You know, we invest in a company and we say, what do you need? They said we need to have more automation for batteries because batteries represent 40% of the cost of our vehicle. Now, Lion is the only company in Canada to have this automated manufacturing for batteries. So for me, when I do that, the satisfaction I have is that I maintain the job of today, but I do know in the bottom of my heart that I'm creating the job of tomorrow. Because investing in these things, hybrid propulsion, I speak to people in the aerospace sector. I said, don't call me necessarily to add, 50,000 square feet to your plan. Tell me what is the future of aviation in 20 years from now? And how can Canada be that place where you're going to do, for example, hybrid propulsion? What is the future in aerospace? What's the future in natural resources? What's the future in the agri sector? How can Canada contribute to feed the world? What would we need to do that? It's these type of things. You know, in politics, one thing I've known when you've been around like me, actually, I've moved quite around. I said to the Prime Minister, I've probably have moved, done a number of the departments now. But one thing you know is that there's a start, but there's a finish time. And the finish time can come faster than you think sometimes. And certainly what I want to do with you and your members is to say, during my time as Innovation, Science and Industry Minister, have we put Canada for future success? And I think there's something about intergenerational equity. Are we making, we're borrowing, we're investing, but I think we need always to be conscious, is that what we're going to do today? Not only serve the people today, but what is that going to leave to our kids and grandkids? So the green economy, the future, maintain jobs today, create those of tomorrow. If I have contributed even slightly to that, parent, I think one day I'll retire and I said, if I have at least brought 1 or 2 companies or 3 companies or 4 or 5, whatever, that are still there 20 years from now and employ thousands of Canadians and families who can prosper, I would probably go home and say mission accomplished.
Minister, thank you. It's been a fascinating conversation for me, and it's one that could go on for much, much longer. Sadly, we've run out of time before I could ask the 2 questions that Martha and I, as ex-politicians, both would have liked to have asked you. The first one being, what's in the budget? And the second one is, when is the next election? And sadly, we don't have the time to do that.
But you know the answer to these questions, Perry and Martha. So I know you know the answer to these questions. But I would say it's been a real delight. And again, I hope that we'll have the opportunity to do more together. I truly value your organization, your tremendous leadership. And it's been a real honor to be with you today and to share some thoughts with you.
Well, thank you. And we are very grateful for your outreach and for your dedication to Canada, and count on us if we can be helpful as you continue in your important work now. Thank you so much, Minister, for being with us today. Let me, with that, then hand it over back again to Mario, our chair.
Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci, Perrin. On that note, thanks all for participating in this executive summit. Nous avons choisi le thème de l'innovation et de la relance économique. Je pense que c'est un thème qui est vraiment pertinent. Et par la qualité des panélistes et des intervenants qu'on a eu aujourd'hui, ça confirme un peu l'engagement, l'alignement qui sont nécessaires au Canada afin que l'on puisse sortir de la crise, non pas comme avant, mais encore mieux positionné pour le développement de notre économie et de nos communautés. So I think through all of these conversations and exchanges at the Chamber, we're really proud to have articulated issues around innovation and the relaunch of the economy so that we can all come out of this much stronger than when we came into COVID. So there's lots of alignment, there's lots of goodwill, there's lots of innovation led by business, there's lots of willingness from government to partner. So I think the onus is on us to make the most of it. So I just want to close by thanking our sponsors, without whom this would not have been possible. So Ovintiv, Power Corporation of Canada, La Banque Royale du Canada, Rio Tinto, Suncor Energy, Sun Life Financial, and TELUS Health for this session. And our leadership sponsors as well are Syncrude and University of Toronto. So I've missed some, I think I've missed some. So pardon me, in no specific order. Air Canada also, Agricor, Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, CN, Cogeco, Export Development Canada, Enbridge, Fortis, Mosaic, Nutrien. So on that note, we're just here to say that the Canadian Chamber will set out to do its great work and be leaders on articulating future opportunities for Canada and all Canadians, led by the business in collaboration with government. Donc, sur cette note, merci beaucoup à chacune des participants et au plaisir de vous retrouver à notre prochain sommet. Merci. Ciao.